Hi, everybody. Welcome back, or welcome here for the first time, depending whether you're here last week or not. The weather tons better this week, so just glad to see your face again. And we might have somebody. Is your friend coming a little later? Can't make it tonight, so yeah, okay. I bet you. I bet you nobody else has that excuse. Yeah. Yeah. I won't ask. Um, you know. I guess I've been there, done that, but it's been a while since that's happened to me. So, well, tonight's topic is who is Jesus Christ, and that's not just a Christian topic. I mean, Muslims have an answer for that, Hindus have an answer for that, Buddhists have an answer for that. Um, People who are agnostic perhaps have an answer for that. So there's a lot of debate about one person in history, and you got to ask, well, why would so many different people have opinion on just one person? It probably connects a lot to something I mentioned at the very end of last week when we were talking about is there life after death? And one of the things I offered is that, okay, there's purported revelation saying that there's life after death. So Jesus himself says, in my Father's house are many rooms. If that were not so, I would have told you. The context is clearly about eternal life. So if Jesus is a person who would know, then that's a pretty important statement. If he's not, then it's an empty statement. But he also goes on to say, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So that's a very, I don't know, inflammatory statement. It either speaks to his sole importance to mankind or to the fact that he doesn't know what he's talking about, one thing or the other. So one of the things, and looking at what people say about who Jesus is one idea that's advanced is that Jesus is a fictitious character, that he never actually existed. And you ask yourself, how would I know somebody who lived 2,000 years ago, whether they were real or fictitious? It could be a lot of different things. You would look for a lot of different things. One of the things that obviously is their main source of knowing anything about Jesus is the Bible. So it sort of has a companion question. Is the Bible anything reliable, or is it so distorted or itself a fiction? Here's some facts that I found interesting. I hope you do. Before the printing press with movable type, so we're talking Gutenberg, just before 1500s, obviously every book was written out by hand. Of the existing texts that we have, ancient texts written by hand, the biggest by far is the Bible. For the Bible as a whole, 25,000 written parts of the Bible somewhere in a museum or university or some church part. Of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 5,000 examples, some of them datable by using techniques like radio dating and also looking at the ink that they used to within the first century, which is significant. Now, what's the big deal about the number? When you got a big body of them, a large number, you can compare them with each other to see if they've been changed over the course of time. Maybe if somebody made a boo-boo in their copying, was it copied, and you can make them into family. And there are people who actually do that. I'm glad I'm not one of them. It sounds incredibly boring, but somebody does that. And so, oddly enough, the further we get out in time, probably the more accurate text of the Bible we actually have, because other people were working with just relatively few copies. Now, to give you a sense of comparison with some other books, stuff written by Plato, for instance. He's 347, very famous Greek philosopher, 347 BC. the oldest text we have of any of Plato's works is from the 10th century, so 1,300 years after his life. Same thing with Aristotle, roughly the same period, 1,400 years to the first text. For Aristotle, of handwritten copies, 49. That's all you got, let alone 25,000. For Herodotus, who was a famous historian, once again, his dates, 425. 10th century again is the earliest we have anything from him. Julius Caesar, in his record of the Gallic Wars, only 10 copies, handwritten, earliest 1,000 years after they were written. So this is very different. Now, if you talk about things outside of Western culture, one example that I found was Buddhist texts that were found in a cave in China. They date from 100 BC to 1200 AD, but the earliest one is still 500 years after the purported lifetime of Buddha. So there's, big difference as far as the texts themselves. Of course, the Bible talks about Jesus, but, what if the Bible's a lie? So you got to go look for other things. Archaeology, well, it doesn't have a spot that written in stone, here's Jesus or whatever. A lot of the characters that you find in the Bible, you do find artifacts for. One I got to see myself. Just a few summers ago, I went to Israel, just got off the plane. We were completely exhausted. Karen was on that trip, but we saw there carved in stone, Pontius Pilate, the man who had Jesus executed. So he's a historical figure. The other thing to look at is ancient references of somebody else who wasn't a Christian talking about either Christians or Christ. And you get those very early too. Two of the better known Roman historians refer to the period of Nero, which would be right around 76 AD, and how Nero persecuted Christians. Same thing with a man called Pliny the Younger. He's right around 100 AD, and he was talking about the problem of the Christians. So obviously, the book can be traced back to that first century, and a movement can be traced back to the first century. So that would lead me to conclude he wasn't a fictitious character. Whoever he was, he existed. Could he have been a crazy guy? Like right now, I think you probably go down to Rescue Mission or look along the Pigeon Creek and find several people who think they're Jesus. It's not an uncommon thing to have kind of megalomaniac kind of tendencies. So maybe he was one of those. But if you look at Old Testament, which is the stuff written before Jesus, and we know it's written before Jesus because of the Dead Sea Scrolls, got to see where those were found too. In Qumran, right next to the Dead Sea, those definitely date before Jesus. And they have prophecies within them about a Messiah coming. And Jewish people have, they would count many more references than I would, thousands of them. Some of them, if you're going to pick thousands out of the Old Testament, I would say pretty vague. But others are very specific. Where he was born, how he would die, how much he would be traded for in cash to the authorities. A hint at him being born of a virgin. Words about a slaughter of the innocents in the area, slaughter of children right around where he was born. A lot of those things, very specific, things that either you couldn't set up for yourself or you wouldn't want to, especially being crucified. I don't care how into it you are, you don't elect that kind of death. So there's these messianic prophecies, and we know from history that the Jewish people had a very strong expectation of arrival of somebody like that right about the time of Jesus. Now, if you go to a Jewish person and you ask, who's knowledgeable about this stuff, and you ask them, well, why don't you believe in Jesus? One of the things they would pick out is that Jesus didn't seem to fulfill some of the prophecies about him being a warrior, or at least the text looks like he's a warrior. Everything else fits him. Perhaps understanding of what kind of war he's fighting is the thing that causes confusion here. Jesus was a warrior, but not the typical kind that the people were expecting. He also, according to the Bible, had all these miracles that are written down by eyewitnesses. They don't say, Jesus told me that he walked across the lake last night, or Jesus told me that he rose this person or that person from the dead. It's witnessed by people who either knew it to be a fact or knew it to be a lie, one of the two. So they recorded it and knew it to be a lie. And the Bible is this big conspiracy to start a new religion. There's got to be a motive in my mind as to why you would do that. To gather a following and have power, or to gain money, or the things that normally motivate people. And that's where the difficult time that early Christians have really fly in the face of that. They were wildly persecuted, first by Jewish people who saw them as a splinter group from Judaism, and then later by the Romans. And many suffered for their faith. If the original people who are his disciples are actual people, then all but one of them died a miserable death. And they would know whether that what they believed was truth or lie. Why stick with it if it were a lie? Maybe one of the biggest people who, for me, puts weight behind the claims of Jesus is Paul. Paul of Tarsus was a Jewish man who persecuted Christianity bitterly to his own admission, and he's very embarrassed about doing so because he encounters Jesus resurrected. Why would you get a guy like that to make an about face? So it takes me back to the original question. Who is Jesus? His own claims, or the claims within Scripture themselves. One is that he's the Son of God. And that is, I think, clearly there. Another one, a claim about him, that he's born of the Virgin Mary. Now, next week I'll talk more about why that would be so. But you look at that and say, well, that can't happen. Yes, if your girlfriend comes up to you, or your daughter, or your wife, and says, I'm with child and I'm a virgin, you have every reason to be skeptical. That's sort of the point. The miracles of Jesus can't physically happen. The birth of Jesus from a virgin can't physically happen, but they did. That's why it's something recorded in history, rather than here's a teacher who taught something and there's, right? The other thing about Jesus that he claims is that he is there to do something, and it's not the thing that connects with what other religions tend to say about him. A lot of non-Christians would say Jesus is a great teacher, he's a great motivator, leader, and that's all very nice. But Jesus himself, while he was a teacher, and he did miraculous things that helped people, didn't seem to be there just to be a teacher or to be there just to do nice things for people. He was there to do something for all of us. He was on a mission, and it's a strange mission. But what he did was to make himself sort of like, I guess I would call him the apex person for all of humanity, so that he could represent all of humanity and fulfill God's law for us where we couldn't, and then to switch it back around and become the one person who took it all back on himself. The punishment that God's law required falls on Jesus Christ. And from the very beginning, he hints that he's heading toward a mission, and toward the end, he actually lays out to his disciples what that mission is, and they don't like it. And they don't believe it until he actually does that. So that's some things to think about who Jesus was or is, and I'm going to say is, because for myself, I believe myself, very subjective, that I encounter Jesus all the time. I haven't seen him, can't say I touched him exactly, but from very early in my life to now, I do believe that I've encountered Jesus through prayer, and that he has done things in my life that I can't account for otherwise, and it has really shaped my existence. I could see where somebody would be skeptical and say, "Oh, your mom and dad just put that in your head. You know, you've been enculturated." Well, maybe, but to be honest with you, I'm not an easily enculturated person. Though I seem maybe conformist to you, I'm actually a fair degree of rebellious. So if I didn't feel like my church body was teaching the right thing, I'd be out of here. If I felt there was a stronger evidence of truth outside of Christianity, I would leave it. If this is any evidence, go to my seminary days and look at my class picture and ask who's not there. And the only person who's not there is me. That's not because I'm an imposter, but because I said, "Man, you guys are charging too much for the picture. I'm not going to show up." And I didn't, you know. And to this day, you know, when I hear even my own church body saying something I don't agree with, I stand up and disagree, and I've gotten in trouble multiple times for that. So what I'm saying to you is, my belief in Jesus is not just something learned. I believe it's something experienced and something given to me by Jesus himself. And I don't think I would be here, and I certainly wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't genuinely believe that. So tonight, you can share with one another what you think about this topic. As sort of the general theme is, who do you think Jesus is? And why do you think so? And of course, we'll do that over dinner, which is? Okay, great. Okay. So you didn't like the bum rush that we had last week? Is that what you're telling us? All right.